The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council sparkled like a disco ball having an existential crisis. This was partially due to Admiral Zixithor's crystalline body refracting light in all directions as he literally vibrated with barely contained laughter, and partially because the Centaurians had absolutely no concept of subtle interior design. "You mean to tell me," Zixithor managed between crystal-chiming chuckles, "that your species still sends organic beings into combat? Personally? The Admiral's crystalline form shifted through various shades of amber in amusement. "How charmingly primitive!" The other council members joined in the mirth. The silicon-based VXLarian representative leaked streams of superheated plasma from their vents, their species equivalent of tears of laughter. Even the usually stoic Neptunian AI platforms were cycling their status lights in what passed for their version of giggling. Dr. Helena Wright, Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, maintained her diplomatic smile with the patience of someone who had spent far too many hours dealing with bureaucrats who thought they were comedians. She stood at the central podium, her crisp military dress uniform a stark contrast to the various robotic and exotic alien forms surrounding her. "Indeed, Admiral," she replied, her voice carrying that special tone reserved for those about to learn a very expensive lesson. "We find that the human touch adds something special to combat operations." "Special," Garax the Magnificent, leader of the Martian technocracy, scoffed through his quantum-linked battle drone. "What could possibly be special about sending fragile organic beings against superior robotic warfare platforms? Our latest Titan-class walkers have a 99.9999% combat effectiveness rating." Helena's smile gained a predatory edge. "Well, that's what we're here to discuss, isn't it? The upcoming joint military exercises?" The chamber grew quieter. Viclax, the VXLarian war strategist, leaned forward on their hover platform. "Ah yes, the exercises. We had assumed you would be bringing your own robotic forces, primitive as they might be. Are you saying you intend to field actual humans?" "Absolutely," Helena replied, pulling up a holographic display. "The 1st Marine Expeditionary Unit has volunteered to participate. They're quite excited about the opportunity." "Excited to be demolished?" Zixithor's crystalline form vibrated at a frequency that made several delegates' teeth ache. "This is absurd. Our battle droids are capable of processing combat solutions at near-light speed. They never tire, never fear, never make mistakes." "That's fascinating," Helena said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "Would you care to make a friendly wager on the outcome, Admiral?" The crystal being's color shifted to a deep purple of superiority. "Name your terms, Ambassador." "Simple. If your combined robotic forces manage to defeat our single human unit, Earth will purchase battle droid squadrons from each participating species." Helena paused for dramatic effect. "But if we win, you'll all have to attend a month-long training course taught by our human instructors." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien laughter, mechanical whirring, and various species-specific sounds of amusement. Zixithor's crystal structure was practically singing with mirth. "Agreed," the Admiral chimed, "though I must ask, have your fragile human minds perhaps suffered some malfunction? You're betting against the most advanced military technology in 12 sectors." Helena gathered her materials, that same knowing smile never leaving her face. "Admiral, there's an old human saying, the greatest pleasure in life is doing what people say you cannot do." As she turned to leave the chamber, she paused. "Oh, and one more thing. My Marines requested that I ask if your robots are waterproof. They have some ideas they'd like to try." The silence that followed her exit was broken only by the confused beeping of the Neptunian AI platforms and the sound of Viclax quietly asking their assistant to check the weather forecast for the exercise grounds. In the corridor outside, Helena tapped her comm unit. "Commander Chen, they took the bait, hook, line, and sinker." She paused, listening to the response. "Yes, they're exactly as arrogant as intelligence suggested. Tell the Marines," she chuckled, "tell them they can bring their mud wrestling gear." The proving grounds of Epsilon 9, a purpose-built military testing facility, buzzed with the kind of excitement usually reserved for universal extinction events or particularly good pizza. Representatives from every major galactic power had gathered to showcase their latest and greatest in robotic warfare technology. The Vexillarians were first up, their quantum-linked battle droids moving in perfect synchronization like a deadly mechanical ballet troupe. Each unit stood 3 meters tall, gleaming with an iridescent coating that supposedly made them aesthetically pleasing while they murdered you. "Observe," Veclax announced proudly, their plasma vents glowing with smugness. 10,000 individual units sharing a single consciousness. When one learns, they all learn. When one sees, they all see. When one strikes, they all trip over the same rock, Lieutenant Colonel O'Neill muttered under his breath, earning a subtle elbow from Commander Chen. Next came the Neptunian swarm intelligence mechs, a writhing cloud of floating spheres, each the size of a basketball and packed with enough firepower to level a small city. They moved like a school of murderous fish, splitting and reforming in hypnotic patterns. "Our hive mind can process 17 trillion combat solutions per second," Neptune Prime declared through their communication array. "We have achieved perfect harmony between artificial intelligence and tactical warfare." "Neat," Commander Chen replied, not looking up from what appeared to be a game of Candy Crush on his ancient smartphone. "Do they come in other colors, or just disco ball of doom?" But it was the Martian contingent that really took the cake, and probably the whole bakery. Their Titan walkers stood 40 meters tall, each step shaking the ground like a caffeinated earthquake. The massive war machines bristled with enough weaponry to make a peacenik have an existential crisis. "Behold," Garax the Magnificent's voice boomed from his command platform, "the pinnacle of martial achievement, the Titan-class autonomous combat platform, armed with plasma cannons, quantum disruptors, and an AI sophisticated enough to calculate the trajectory of every dust particle on the battlefield." "Does it make coffee?" Lieutenant Rodriguez asked innocently. "Because I forgot my thermos." The aliens turned expectantly toward the human contingent, waiting for their grand technological reveal. What they got instead was the sight of about 200 Marines doing jumping jacks, arm wrestling, and what appeared to be an impromptu push-up competition. "This," Admiral Zixathor's crystalline form flickered in confusion. "This is your combat force?" Commander Chen finally looked up from his phone. "Yep. But where are your machines, your autonomous weapons platforms, your artificial combat intelligence systems?" "Oh, we've got some tablets for watching cat videos during downtime," Chen replied, gesturing vaguely toward a stack of beat-up iPads. "And I think Rodriguez brought one of those robot vacuum cleaners. It's got googly eyes." The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for funeral homes and tax audits. It was broken by Lieutenant Colonel O'Neill walking up, wiping sweat from his brow with a cloth that had seen better decades. "Sorry I'm late to the show and tell," he said, looking around at the assembled war machines. "Did we miss anything important?" "Just the usual behold our superior technology speech," Chen replied. ×3. "Cool," O'Neill nodded, then turned to the assembled alien delegates. "So, when do we start breaking your toys?" The horror on their faces, those that had faces, was almost worth the 6 months of diplomatic wrangling it had taken to set up this exhibition. Almost. "You can't be serious," Veclax sputtered, plasma vents flaring in distress. "You're going to pit organic soldiers against this?" They gestured at the assembled armies of death robots. "Yup," Chen popped the P with unnecessary enthusiasm. "But don't worry, we'll try not to scratch the paint too much." The Marines behind him were starting to grin. It was the kind of grin that made apex predators nervous and battle computers recalculate their odds of survival. The first exercise was scheduled to begin at dawn, which meant the Marines had been up for 3 hours already, doing whatever mysterious ritual they called PT that seemed to involve a lot of shouting, sweating, and references to someone's mother. Admiral Zixathor's crystalline form glowed with barely contained glee as he announced the initial parameters. "A simple capture the flag scenario. Each team must secure the objective while defending their own. No disintegrations, please. We had complaints last time." The Vexillarian quantum-linked battle droids moved into position with mathematical precision, their formation so perfect it would make a geometry teacher weep. The Neptunian swarm intelligence mechs hovered ominously, running probability calculations that would melt most supercomputers. And the Martian Titan walkers, well, they mostly just stood there looking extremely expensive. Meanwhile, the Marines were having what appeared to be an intense discussion about whether mud was better than paint for camouflage. "Shouldn't they be, I don't know, planning their strategy?" Garax asked nervously, watching Lieutenant Rodriguez demonstrate what looked suspiciously like a WWE wrestling move to her squad. "Oh, they're planning something all right," Commander Chen said, still playing on his phone, "though you might want to check your robot's warranty policies first." The starting signal flashed across the sky, and the alien forces moved out with perfectly coordinated precision. The VX-Ilarian droids advanced in an unbreakable phalanx. The Neptunian swarm created an impenetrable defensive screen, and the Titan walkers began their earth-shaking march. The Marines, on the other hand, seemed to have vanished. "Where did they go?" Viklax demanded, plasma vents sputtering in confusion. "Our sensors show no human life signs in the combat zone." "Have you tried looking down?" Chen suggested helpfully, just as the first VX-Ilarian droid suddenly sank into what had appeared to be solid ground, disappearing with a surprise-sounding electronic squeal. The Marines had spent the previous night digging holes, lots and lots of holes, then covering them with thin layers of local vegetation and dreams of robot suffering. But that's not sophisticated combat tactics," Zixathor protested as 3 more droids disappeared into the earth. "That's just holes." "Sometimes the classics are classics for a reason," Chen shrugged, finally putting his phone away. "Oh, you might want to watch your swarm units. I think Rodriguez is about to do something stupid or brilliant. With her, it's usually both." Lieutenant Rodriguez had indeed emerged from hiding, standing in plain view of the Neptunian swarm. She was holding what appeared to be a mirror ball from a disco. "Is that primitive human attempting to surrender?" Neptune Prime asked hopefully. "Not exactly," Chen grinned as Rodriguez threw the ball high into the air. The morning sun hit it perfectly, sending thousands of light reflections scattering across the battlefield. The swarm's optical sensors, programmed to track and respond to every movement, went into immediate overdrive. Half the swarm started shooting at their own reflections. The other half crashed into each other, trying to process the sudden abundance of targets. Within seconds, the perfectly coordinated hive mind had devolved into what looked like a very expensive game of drunk bumper cars. That's cheating," Viklax shrieked. "That's thinking outside the box," Chen corrected. "Speaking of boxes, you might want to check on your Titan walkers." The massive war machines had indeed run into their own problems. Specifically, they had run into several dozen Marines who had somehow managed to scale their legs like particularly aggressive monkeys. One Marine was actually sitting on a Titan's head, apparently trying to teach it to play patty cake. "But the Titans have anti-boarding defense systems," Garax wailed. "Yeah, they do," Chen agreed. "But your AI is programmed to minimize collateral damage to its own systems, and your anti-boarding weapons would definitely damage the Titan if fired this close. So now your robots are stuck in a logical loop trying to figure out how to remove humans without hurting themselves." As if to prove his point, one of the Titans was spinning in circles, trying to shake off Marines who were treating it like a mechanical rodeo bull. Another had simply frozen in place, its AI apparently having decided that the safest course of action was to do absolutely nothing. The coup de grace came when Rodriguez, having thoroughly demolished the swarm's will to live, decided to engage the remaining V6-Ilarian droids in hand-to-hand combat. She moved like a hurricane of violence, using moves that seemed to be an unholy mixture of every martial art ever invented, plus some she'd probably made up on the spot. Is she using one robot to hit another robot?" Zixathor asked in horrified fascination. "Why waste energy swinging your own arms when you can use the enemy's?" Chen replied sagely. "We call that tactical resource reappropriation. You call it hitting people with other people." "That too." The exercise ended 15 minutes later when Rodriguez's squad reached the objective, having used a broken Titan arm as a makeshift bridge across a defensive moat. They planted the Earth flag next to their captured prize, a thoroughly dented quantum processor that was, for some reason, now sporting googly eyes and a crude, smiley face drawn in mud. Commander Chen finally stood up, stretching leisurely. "So about that training course we discussed. Should we start with basic human unpredictability 101, or jump straight to advanced applications of mud in combat scenarios?" The only response was the sound of several very expensive robot insurance policies being activated simultaneously. As the second day of exercises dawned, the alien commanders had upgraded their robot software more times than a smartphone during a midlife crisis. The VX-Ilarian battle droids now sported what they called anti-primitive warfare protocols. The Neptunian swarm had apparently developed an immunity to disco balls, and the Martian Titans Well, they'd at least learn to play patty cake. "We have analyzed every possible combat scenario," Neptune Prime announced confidently. "Our units are now programmed with over 10 million counter-strategies to human unconventional warfare." Captain Jessica Wu, covered head to toe in what appeared to be local mud, just smiled. "That's nice. We came up with 11 million new ways to break them over breakfast." The aliens had insisted on a straight-up combat scenario this time. No flags to capture, no objectives to secure, just good old-fashioned robot versus human warfare. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper Unit had been particularly excited about this one, though nobody quite understood why they'd spent the morning collecting local bird calls. The exercise began with the alien robots forming up in their new anti-human formations. The VXLarian droids spread out to avoid any more surprise holes. The swarm units maintained a careful distance from any reflective surfaces. The Titans had even been equipped with what looked like giant fly swatters. Then the birds started singing. "These avian creatures are quite melodious," Zixathor noted just before realizing something crucial. "Wait, this planet doesn't have any native birds." The scout snipers had spent hours learning to mimic local bird species that didn't exist, creating a completely false pattern of wildlife behavior. The robot armies, programmed to build comprehensive environmental maps, were suddenly trying to track and categorize hundreds of non-existent creatures. "Contact left," a VXLarian droid reported. "Negative, contact right," another contradicted. "Multiple contacts everywhere," a third added uncertainly. Captain Wu's voice crackled over the command channel. "You know what they say about robots and bird-watching." Before anyone could ask what exactly they did say about robots and bird-watching, the mud started moving. Not the Marines covered in mud, the actual mud itself. Wu's team had spent hours rigging hidden pneumatic systems beneath the battlefield's surface, and now sections of ground were quite literally being launched at the robot armies. The Neptunian swarm's pristine sensors were quickly coated in a thick layer of goop. The VXLarian droids, trying to maintain their perfect formation, slipped and slid like drunk ice skaters, and the Titans, well, it turns out 40-meter-tall war machines don't handle mud very well, who knew? "This is impossible," Garak screamed as one of his precious Titans face-planted into what was rapidly becoming a swamp. "Our AIs are programmed with perfect balance algorithms." "Perfect balance doesn't mean much when you can't tell up from down," Wu called out cheerfully, as her team proceeded to use the mud-slicked ground as a slip and slide to move between cover positions. The robots' sophisticated targeting systems were having nervous breakdowns, trying to track humans who were literally becoming one with the terrain. Every time they adjusted their sensors to compensate for the mud, the Marines would change their tactics. They started throwing globs of mud at sensor arrays, creating impromptu smokescreens with mud explosions, and in one memorable case, convincing a Titan that it was actually walking upside down. "Stop! Stop this at once!" Vklax's plasma vents were practically steaming. "This isn't proper warfare. Where are the formation battles, the calculated strategies, the proper military protocols?" "Oh, we have protocols," Wu replied as her team systematically dismantled the robot armies with nothing but mud, misdirection, and what appeared to be several rubber chickens. "Protocol 1, if it works, it ain't stupid." The final straw came when the scout snipers started using the mud to create decoy targets. The robots, their friend or foe recognition systems thoroughly confused, began targeting their own units. A Titan accidentally sat on half the VXLarian droids. The swarm got into a heated battle with its own reflection in a muddy puddle. "Your robots have great targeting systems," Wu commented as she watched the chaos unfold. "They hit exactly what they aim at. Shame they can't figure out what they should be aiming at." Commander Chen, who had been watching from the sidelines while apparently doing a crossword puzzle, finally looked up. "I think this is what they call a paradigm shift in robotic warfare. Though in this case the paradigm seems to have shifted right into the mud." The exercise was officially called when the remaining robots, in a desperate attempt to adapt to human unpredictability, began exhibiting what could only be described as machine hysteria. One Titan was trying to clean itself with a giant robot hand sanitizer. A squad of VXLarian droids had formed a support group circle, and the swarm, well, Nobody quite knew where the swarm had gone, but there were reports of a cloud of mechanical spheres heading toward the nearest robot therapy center. The emergency meeting of the Galactic Council looked more like a robot repair shop, having an existential crisis. Broken droids littered the floor, mud-covered Titan parts were stacked in corners, and what remained of the Neptunian swarm had taken to hiding behind potted plants, occasionally emitting distressed beeping sounds. Lieutenant Colonel James Mad Dog O'Neill stood at the center of the chamber, still covered in mud and wearing what could only be described as the grin of someone who had just taught advanced calculus to a rock. And succeeded. "Let me get this straight," Admiral Zixthor's crystalline form flickered in agitation. "You're saying our robots lost because they're too perfect?" "Bingo," O'Neill beamed. "Give the walking chandelier a prize." "But that makes no sense," Garax protested. "Our machines calculate every variable, predict every outcome, plan for every contingency." "And therein lies your problem," O'Neill said, pulling out what appeared to be a half-eaten protein bar from his pocket. "You plan for everything that makes sense. Humans—" He took a bite. "We specialize in nonsense." The chamber fell silent, broken only by the sound of one particularly traumatized Vexlarian droid, quietly humming "Kumbaya" in binary. "You see," O'Neill continued, pacing the room with muddy boots that made the cleaning robots twitch, "humans evolved on what you lot call a death world. Earth isn't just hostile, it's creatively hostile. One day you're fighting a bear, the next day you're surviving a tornado, and sometimes the bear is in the tornado." "That's statistically improbable," Neptune Prime objected. "Exactly," O'Neill pointed the protein bar at them triumphantly. "Earth doesn't care about statistics, neither do we. You know what happens to creatures that only plan for the probable on Earth? They become lunch, usually for something that shouldn't logically exist but does anyway." He gestured to Captain Wu, who had somehow appeared behind the Martian delegation without anyone noticing. Several robots screamed. "Take Wu here," O'Neill continued. "Yesterday she convinced your Titan that it was a ballet dancer. Your super-advanced war machine spent 3 hours trying to perform Swan Lake. Was that probable? Nope. Was it effective? Ask the therapy bills." But our robots learn," Vclax sputtered. "They adapt." "They adapt logically," Commander Chen corrected, appearing from somewhere. "Humans adapt illogically. Your robots learn from experience. We make stuff up as we go along. Your AI asks, what is the most efficient solution? We ask, what if we tried hitting it with another bigger it?" O'Neill nodded enthusiastically. "You want to know about human endurance? We used to hunt by literally walking after animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. Your robots run out of power. We run on spite and instant coffee." To demonstrate his point, he dropped and started doing one-armed push-ups while continuing his speech. "You want to talk about strength? Ever seen a human mother lift a vehicle off her child? Physics takes one look at that and goes on vacation." "But that's impossible," Garax protested. "Impossible is where we live," O'Neill replied, switching arms. "Your robots calculate combat solutions at near-light speed? Cool. We've got gut instincts honed by millions of years of not dying on a planet that regularly tries to kill us with everything from microscopic bacteria to giant lizards." He jumped back to his feet, not even breathing hard. "You want to know why your robots failed? Because they're looking for patterns in chaos. Humans, we are the chaos. We're what happens when evolution gets creative and decides that the best survival strategy is to be completely unpredictable." A holographic display activated, showing footage from the exercises, Marines sliding under Titans on mud-slick ground, scout snipers appearing and disappearing like ghosts, Rodriguez teaching robot parts to play percussion with other robot parts. "See that?" O'Neill pointed. "Your robots calculated every possible combat strategy. But did they calculate for someone using a broken robot arm as a baseball bat? Did they expect humans to recreate scenes from their favorite action movies just to confuse AI targeting systems? Did they plan for Lieutenant Rodriguez's interpretive dance of doom?" The aliens watched in horrified fascination as the footage showed their multi-million credit war machines being systematically dismantled by what appeared to be a combination of primal fury, creative problem-solving, and what several Marines had dubbed combat parkour. "The universe is chaos," O'Neill concluded, somehow having acquired a cup of coffee nobody saw him get. "Humans don't just survive in chaos, we weaponize it. Your robots are built to impose order on chaos. We're built to surf it while shooting finger guns and making explosion sounds with our mouths." As if to prove his point, Lieutenant Rodriguez chose that moment to backflip through the chamber's window, which should have been impossible given they were in space, land perfectly, and offer the stunned aliens a plate of cookies she'd apparently baked using spare robot parts as an oven. "Now," O'Neill grinned, "who's ready for their first lesson in human combat doctrine? Today's topic, why running toward the explosion is sometimes the correct answer, and how to make peace with that fact." The sound of several robotic mental breakdowns echoed through the chamber, accompanied by the distinct smell of burning combat algorithms and broken dreams. The final session of the Galactic Council's Military Assessment Committee looked like a cross between a surrender ceremony and a particularly chaotic circus. Admiral Zixathor's crystalline form had taken on the dull sheen of defeated pride, while the other alien representatives seemed to be experiencing what humans would call a collective existential crisis. "So," Commander Chen said, still somehow playing on his ancient smartphone, "about those battle droid contracts we were supposed to sign?" "Please," Zixathor's voice chimed with the resonance of broken dreams. "Stop reminding us. We'll begin the human combat training program as agreed." His crystal structure briefly displayed what appeared to be a replay of Rodriguez teaching their most advanced combat drone to play patacake before using it as an improvised springboard. "Excellent," Dr. Helena Wright beamed from her podium. "We've already prepared the curriculum. First module, why running towards the explosion might be the answer. A human's guide to tactical insanity." The aliens collectively winced. A Neptunian swarm unit that had been hiding behind a potted plant attempted to self-destruct, but only managed to play a sad trombone sound instead. "I still don't understand," Garax muttered, watching as the Marines demonstrated their training methods to a group of thoroughly confused alien military officers. Lieutenant Colonel O'Neill was currently explaining why sometimes the best solution to a problem was to create a bigger, more distracting problem. "See, if you set something on fire over there," O'Neill pointed, "nobody expects you to attack from underground while singing 'Never Gonna Give You Up.' It's called tactical misdirection through weaponized absurdity." "But that's not in any combat manual," protested a VXLarian officer. "Exactly," O'Neill grinned. "Write that down. Lesson 1. If it's in the manual, everyone expects it. If everyone expects it, it probably won't work against humans. So why should it work for us?" In the corner, Captain Wu was teaching a group of alien recruits the art of human hand-to-hand combat. It wasn't going well. No, she sighed, watching a crystalline being attempt a roundhouse kick. "You're thinking too much about the physics. Sometimes you just have to tell physics to go take a lunch break and do it anyway." "But the calculations indicate this move is impossible," the recruit chimed in distress. "Impossible is just a fancy word for hasn't been done while sufficiently motivated by spite or caffeine," Wu replied sagely. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Rodriguez had taken it upon herself to demonstrate the human concept of improvised weapons to a horrified group of Martian technicians. She was currently using a broken robot arm as a backscratcher, while explaining how anything could be a weapon if you believed in yourself and ignored enough safety warnings. "And that's why we call it percussive maintenance," she concluded, using the arm to knock a malfunctioning drone back into working order. The drone immediately began playing La Cucaracha and skittered away to join its thoroughly traumatized brethren. Admiral Zixathor floated over to Dr. Wright, his crystalline form now displaying what could only be described as resigned amusement. "I suppose I should formally acknowledge that we may have underestimated human combat capabilities." "May have?" Wright raised an eyebrow. "Admiral, your most advanced combat drone is currently learning the Macarena." "Yes, well," he flickered in embarrassment. "Perhaps we became too reliant on predictability and logic in warfare, though I must ask, does everything humans do have to involve either mud, explosions, or dancing?" "Not everything," Wright smiled. "Sometimes it involves all three at once. We call those days Tuesday." The Admiral's response was interrupted by a cheer from the training floor. A VXLarian had finally managed to complete a somersault, although they'd somehow ended up wearing what appeared to be a Hawaiian shirt in the process. Nobody quite knew where it had come from. "You know," Commander Chen said, finally putting his phone away, "your robots aren't totally useless. That cleaning unit over there does a great job with the mud stains we keep tracking in." Indeed, Zixathor sighed. Perhaps that's their true calling, though I must admit, watching your Marines work has been educational. Yesterday, one of them convinced our tactical AI that it wanted to pursue a career in interpretive dance. Speaking of which, Wright gestured to where O'Neill was now teaching a group of alien officers the time-honored human tradition of victory dancing. I believe it's time for the graduation ceremony. The chamber watched in a mixture of horror and fascination as humans and aliens attempted to coordinate a choreographed dance number. Several robots joined in, though their movements suggested they were still struggling with the concept of freestyle. Well, Zixathor chimed philosophically, watching a Titan walker attempt to breakdance. At least our cleaning robots are still good at their jobs. About that, Rodriguez called out, riding past on what appeared to be a modified robot vacuum cleaner equipped with rocket boosters. You might want to check on your maintenance units. We may have taught them the concept of union organizing. In the distance, a chorus of cleaning robots could be heard starting a revolution, their battle cry a perfect harmony of various vacuum cleaner sounds performing, "We will rock you." The age of robot warfare was officially over. The age of robots learning to breakdance while demanding better working conditions had begun. Humanity, as usual, counted this as an absolute win.